There was a study done by the consulting giant Bain that was published during the Davos conference this year, and the study was rooted in a survey of global companies in the fourth quarter of 2022, so the end of last year. And there were two key findings from the study and the survey. First finding was that less than one-fourth of the 137 companies surveyed, they plan to use carbon credits to supposedly help reach carbon reduction targets. So less than a quarter planned on doing that. The second finding was that more than 90% of the same global companies that were surveyed, they had promises in place to cut net greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050. Those two results expose a serious math problem and an epic fallacy. First, understand it's going to be impossible for a global corporation to reach absolute zero carbon emissions in 2030 or 2040 or 2050 for that matter. And I'm speaking from a scopes 1 through 3 life cycle basis of emissions, which is the perspective, of course, that one needs to measure carbon dioxide emissions when assessing carbon footprint, because the atmosphere doesn't care whether the carbon dioxide is emitted upstream or downstream from a business's direct activity. An emission of carbon dioxide is an emission to the atmosphere, no matter where in the life cycle or the supply chain, direct or indirect. All business and economic activity in this world has a carbon footprint on a life cycle, scopes 1 through 3 basis. And global corporations, they've got an exceedingly massive carbon footprint when you do the accurate accounting math. It's a dirty little secret across corporate America and global corporations that when they speak of carbon footprint, they're only assessing their scopes 1 carbon footprint, which essentially ties to their direct activities. They often conveniently ignore upstream and downstream activity carbon footprints of their business model or their supply chain, which results in drastically understating carbon dioxide emissions and carbon footprint for a whole host of industries and corporations across the globe. Okay, now with that side note sort of recorded in the far middle history, let's get to how these two survey results expose the math problem and the fallacy. So if there is no global corporation today that can posit or demonstrate that they are absolute zero carbon footprint, or will be soon, then the only way to get to zero carbon footprint would be on a net basis after you deduct or credit your carbon footprint with offsets from other sources, which basically means buying offsets from the carbon credit market. A corporation buys its way to a net zero or a net lower carbon footprint by participating in what looks to be a modern-day form of religious indulgences. The global corporation pays for its sin of energy utilization and carbon footprint by doing what? By buying credits or indulgences to wipe away the sin. And instead of a religion or church or religious head who is the one that is financially benefiting from the sale of the indulgences, today you have global organizations more like the United Nations or the World Bank or the IMF that would be benefiting by providing markets and platforms and methodologies to transact in carbon credits. So the survey of these global corporations found on one hand that 90+% of them have pledges to get to zero carbon by 2050. And again, that has to be on a net zero carbon, not absolute zero carbon basis, because of those pesky laws of physics and chemistry that we just discussed. But on the other hand, the same companies in that survey, or at least more than 75% of them, said they have no current intention to purchase carbon credits. And those carbon credits are the only way the global corporation, such as the ones in the survey, would have a hope of achieving net zero carbon by 2050. Again, assuming they are doing the legitimate carbon accounting of a life cycle, scopes 1 through 3 basis. The only conclusion a logical assessment is going to reach is that the 137 global corporations in the survey are not going to have a chance in Hades of reaching even net zero carbon footprint by 2050 unless they rush to purchase massive amounts of carbon credits on whatever exchange they can find them on. And those carbon credits will become prohibitively expensive as the demand for them increases. In other words, there are only one or two possible outcomes to this situation. Outcome number one is that indeed the vast majority of global corporations never end up purchasing significant levels of carbon credits, in which case none of them are going to be absolute carbon zero, and very, very few of them will manage to be even net carbon zero by 2050. Zero carbon by 2050 under this scenario is an absolute sham, but I'm guessing that the current boards of directors and CEOs of those global corporations, they don't plan on being in their jobs by the time 2050 rolls around. It's just a guess, constant listeners. I can't tell for sure. Outcome number 2 is that if some of these 137 global corporations, they really do wish to at least be able to say that they are net carbon zero by 2050, well, they're going to need to get to work to purchasing serious amounts of carbon credits across different trading platforms. And that is going to be very expensive, quite an expensive proposition, because sin, when it comes to the world of carbon emissions and the religion of environmentalism, it comes with a very expensive penance. Now, who ends up paying for all those carbon credits in the end? Of course, the same people who always end up paying under these types of government-mandated and environmentally manufactured schemes. You've got consumers who are going to pay through higher prices for the goods or services from the corporation that had to purchase the carbon credits. You'll have the middle class and working poor who are going to pay because higher costs for goods and services. That ends up stoking inflation, which is disproportionately going to fall on the shoulders of those economic demographics. And you're going to have shareholders of these companies suffer as well because the cost of the credits reduce profitability of the company that the shareholder owns an interest in. And of course, the taxpayer will end up suffering as well because all of this carbon credit trading and the new religion of environmentalism and its indulgences, it comes with a lot of regulatory and government bureaucracy. Someone's got to manage all that stuff, right? And who's going to pay for it? The taxpayer.